fact, an inveterate liar. Axelle Lemaire, at one point during the speech, the incumbent president, Nicolas Sarkozy, saying when you tell the British press that you're liberal and when you tell the French that you're going to attack finance, you're a liar. What's your reaction to that statement?
Okay, I didn't hear that part of the speech. I don't see why it is a lie to say that the way the financial system has been working so far has shown how excessive it is and how unfair it can be, and the desire to try to regulate a little bit more that system doesn't appear to me as a lie.
Were you surprised to see the French president come out swinging, talking about his opponent being a liar?
I find that position quite aggressive. I'm not sure it's the best way to convince the French people to follow him. I think the French want to hear about his proposals, his project for the country, and not attacks on the project of his opponents.
All right, we'll see whether or not it works. Mark Perlman, another point during the speech. Again, we saw it start to be unveiled on Wednesday when we heard the campaign slogan, Une France forte, a strong France. And throughout the speech, he hammered home that values-driven message, pushing two referendums, one to crack down on the jobless who don't do enough to seek employment, and two, to crack down on illegal immigrants.
Yes, and he's been accused of sticking towards the far right because of those measures of stigmatizing the jobless people, the immigrants, and this is seen as a way of attracting far-right voters. Also, the use of the referendum. It's really interesting because in his 5-year mandate, Nicolas Sarkozy did not use once the referendum. He didn't even broach the idea of the referendum. And now he's bringing this up as a new weapon, and he's kind of mocking those who criticize the referendum as being populist, as something that's against parliamentary democracy. And this is clearly going to be one of his key arguments. I'm going to talk to the French directly, ask them the question that the elite, the political elite, the trade unions, the commentators, the media, you name it, are preventing us from debating. And so he's hoping that this populist message, although he doesn't want to be called a populist, will work. But this is basically only a few options. He said there might be a referendum, but he has not announced anything in terms of new ideas beyond that. I mean, the speech was really about how he views French, a values-driven speech, as you said, and attacking his opponent as a liar and as someone who would weaken France. He had a whole development about how France was being weakened by the ideas of the socialists, the 35-hour work week, coming back to retiring at 60, eventually renegotiating the European treaty. So clearly this was a kind of black and white debate because he knows that he is now establishing himself as a candidate. He has to show that he's very different from François Hollande, but then he wants to show that he's also above the typical right-left division, but people will have a hard time believing this when they see him harping on issues like immigration, jobless and work, and attacking the socialists.
All right. Sophia Baratis, for the second time in less than 24 hours, your country, Greece, was mentioned by the French president, and once again he said to the French, you don't want to wind up like the Greeks. Your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that. He said also another thing, I'm the captain of the boat, I want to stay captain of this boat. It's very funny to see how he didn't even mention the fact that we are 27 countries on the same boat. It's been years, we are in a huge crisis, the economic crisis, but not only. And the essence of this crisis is the failure of the European state members to face the markets and to be solidar one to another. And he pretends he's on the boat on his own. France is on its own boat. We all know that nowadays, or we build again the European boat, or we all fall down together.
Interesting point. And in his speech, Nicolas Sarkozy at the end, giving a little bit, talking a little bit about the Franco-German couple, but there wasn't much about Europe in that speech.
Well, as you know, I took the speech en route, and I did not get the part on Greece, but I want to say this, and apparently he did not correct himself. Greece is the cradle of democracy, and I think it's incredible that today Greece is being dictated by the other European nations what to do and what to become. And when he said something that puzzled me. He said most of the French right, well, that's what he implied, most of the French right people are against Europe. It's not true. We are against this kind of Europe, this autocratic machine that rolls on the people, that works like a steamroller against the will of the people. And that was a fine speech. I mean, the first real conservative speech I've heard in 5 years. Unfortunately, it's from a devalued president because he has not been up to that kind of speech in 5 years. He has not even begun to start the reforms he's speaking about. And it's about late to take care of the people. So
for you, he hasn't been conservative enough during his first mandate. I believe we can go to Annecy. And no, not yet. All right. Well, we hope to be able to join Benjamin Lancard of the ruling UMP party shortly to talk about it. But let me ask you, Axelle Lemaire, what do you think that the tone of the campaign will be? Politics is not for the faint of heart. How does this bode for the 9 weeks to come when you hear that the words spoken in that speech?
I'm quite appalled. I find the speech very divisive, and that's not what I expect from someone who's standing to become president. And I'm talking as if he wasn't a president, but I feel he has never been a president. He's always been a candidate, and he appears to still be a candidate and not have the dimension of a president. So I find it a very dividing speech between people who would supposedly be in favor of illegal immigration and people who would be against illegal immigration, or people who would be hard workers and people who would be lazy, assisted, and who would live on social benefits. And I think he's not tackling the realities of the French people, which are a very high unemployment, which are no growth, no hope for the young generations. And that's what the French people want to hear about. It's real answers to their real problems, instead of trying to attract some electors from extreme fringes of the population in order to guarantee his re-election.
All right, and I believe we can now go to Annecy and to Benjamin Lancard, leader of the Conservative UMP's youth movement, who joins us now from the French Alpine town. Thank you for being with us here. We just heard Axelle Lemaire of the Socialists say she found the speech divisive, and that it was one that's to... what is your reaction when you hear the opposition say that?
No, I'm not surprised by what the opposition can say. Just firstly, I'd say that this speech was a speech of truth and very interesting assessment of what has been done so far for 5 years, and the ability France had to overcome the difficulties which were triggered by the crisis, by the global financial crisis. And secondly, Nicolas Sarkozy answered much criticism against the idea of a referendum, the idea of giving the voice and the speech to the people when there is some blockage, when the negotiation reach a deadlock between trade unions or between parties. And furthermore, I think that after 5 years leading this country, Nicolas Sarkozy has so much to do left, and he has this roadmap to make that France be stronger after the crisis than the way it entered the crisis. I think that's the main issue of this presidential election. And what is very interesting is that he said and he revealed how deep his will was to keep telling the truth to French people. and that's very, very different than the way François Hollande is leading his campaign.
Keep telling the truth, but he, nonetheless, his first campaign speech, and he calls his opponent several times a liar. What does that say about the tone the campaign is going to take?
I think it's very important to say that, those who are watching us can have to understand how many lies the Socialist Party is telling every day to French people about the situation of the crisis, about the fact that we need to reduce our public spending, about the fact that we need to invest more to have a stronger growth, and the fact is that the struggle between Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande and the other candidates is not a struggle between the right or the left. It's between who says the truth and who says the lies, who has a real vision of what is the crisis is today, and which are the difficulties we need to overcome. And that's the main difference between François Hollande and Nicolas Sarkozy. Today we heard a speech not of someone from the right wing or from the left wing. We heard a speech of someone who sees the situation as it is and who wants to protect people. When he says, I want a stronger France, I want la France forte, the strong France, it means that to protect France as we protect our families, as we protect those we love and those we like, we need to say the truth. We need to describe the situation accurately, and we need to do some efforts, to work more, to be able to, so that France may remain an independent country, and a country rich and independent for the next generations, for the future generations.
Mark Perelman, your thoughts on how this campaign is going to go after that first speech?
Well, clearly it's going to be a tough campaign because Nicolas Sarkozy is in the position of a challenger, which is rather unusual for an incumbent president. He's way behind in the polls. They show like a 20-point differential in the second round with François Hollande. So this is why he actually decided to declare his candidacy now in mid-February, although the plan had been to declare himself as late, maybe as mid-March, but he did so because there was lots of pressure on him, including from his own camp, to declare his candidacy. And clearly he's going to tell the French, probably use some scare tactics, saying, this is a terrible crisis, a series of crises. You don't realize how deep the crisis is because maybe you're not in power, and maybe you're listening too much to the socialists who might say that the future is bright and rosy and so on. So, yes, it's going to be a tough campaign. Nicolas Sarkozy has laid out the tone of the campaign, but again, not many specifics. The only thing that was maybe interesting was the very personal tone at the beginning of the speech, where he said, I gave it a lot of thought. I thought I needed to reward the French with the confidence they gave me 5 years ago, and I haven't finished a job. And he said, I could have abandoned this. This would have maybe relieved some of the people close to me.
He said, I made mistakes, but I always tried to be just and sincere.
Exactly. So he said, I made mistakes. It was a tough decision to decide to run again. Maybe my family didn't like it too much, or would have preferred that I stay at home, especially with a young daughter. But he's clearly showing, I'm going to sacrifice myself again, and it might not be very shining and so on, but at least you can trust me.
All right, you were talking about Nicolas Sarkozy as the outsider. We can show the latest survey that was published before he made his Wednesday announcement that he was seeking a second term. And this is the picture for the first round, according to Harris Interactive. A 4-point advantage for François Hollande, the socialist. And look at Marine Le Pen, the far-right candidate, on 20%. That's just 4 points back of the incumbent president. And it's true that in past surveys, the far-right's vote has sometimes been underestimated. Second round, 16-point margin for the May 6th election. That would be the outcome there. So very much Marine Le Pen high on people's 14 points. Marine Le Pen very much high on people's minds throughout the early parts of this campaign. And she spoke on Wednesday and was asked whether Sarkozy can, as Mark was discussing, reinvent himself. Her answer, a firm no.
Nicolas Sarkozy in this campaign, it's like Groundhog Day, as if everything was starting fresh, as if nothing happened, as if the incumbent president was a fresh face in politics, full of hope, with a bright future.
Benjamin Ancard, you say that this wasn't a... Oh, we've lost Benjamin Ancard. So, but I will ask Axelle Lemaire in London at this point. The far right is very much the power broker, it seems, in this in the run up to the first round.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we have to take that into consideration. It means that there is a need for the people who could be tempted to vote for Marine Le Pen to understand their concerns. And yes, there are concerns regarding work and there are concerns regarding immigration. It is false to say that the Socialist Party is not realistic and is not ready to deal with the real issues. So we're ready to do that work. I think it is quite worrying to see this rise of the extreme right. It's not only in France, it is all across Europe, and we have a responsibility to answer to that by putting forward projects, convincing ideas to the electorate. I'd like to come back to this idea of truth and lies. I find it very difficult to believe Nicolas Sarkozy now because he has promised so many things during his first presidential campaign and throughout his mandate, and he never did anything. So how can he now tell us to believe him? And when he discovers the referendum, when in the past he has refused to organize referendum, he refused to organize one for the Lisbon Treaty. He refused to organize one to reform the Constitution in 2008. He refused to organize a referendum about the the golden rule, and now all of a sudden he wants to give the power back to the people. What François Hollande says about the referendum is that the first referendum is the presidential election, and with that democratic power in hand, then you could only use that very particular mean to reform institutions, to take international decision, but not to deal with social or society issues.
Mark Perelman, the elephant in the room when it comes to referendums is the Lisbon Treaty, where only Ireland had one, and then, in fact, that was then they made them vote twice because they didn't vote the proper way the first time.
And in France, it went through the parliamentary way. And Nicolas Sarkozy probably remembers that when he was interior minister, there was a referendum organized on the status of the island of Corsica. And the government of which he was part was quite certain they would win, and they lost. And so this is probably an experience that Nicolas Sarkozy kept with him under the first mandate. And now, yes, it's very, but it's clearly one of the ideas. Nicolas Sarkozy and his entourage have been telling the media and others, you'll see, you'll be surprised, we'll have new ideas, we'll try to destabilize François Hollande. And this is clearly one tool they're using, the referendum. Some of the people around Nicolas Sarkozy are known to be very keen on this issue of, we have to talk directly to the people. All the political world is preventing the president from being in touch with them. And so this is the idea that Nicolas Sarkozy wants to recreate a link. It's also a way of saying, yes, I've been in an ivory tower for all those 5 years, and I want to get out of it.
All right. We're glad to have Benjamin Ancard back. Sorry for the technical issues. We have him by telephone. Benjamin, do you wish there had been a referendum on the 35-hour work week, on the Lisbon Treaty?
It was, there was a very strong crisis to overcome and to deal with, and so I think that, and secondly, France had, and President Sarkozy had a majority in Congress, Parliament, National Assembly plus Senate, to make a first reform of Constitution in 2008. And in this very reform of the Constitution in July 2008, there was a change of the Article 11, and in this article you can use the referendum to address issues much larger concerning, for instance, not only institutions but also economy, society, or these kind of issues. And so that's why now there is a very logic and clarity to first change the constitution in 2008 and then to propose referendums. And of course, we won't make referendums every day, but the idea is that when there is a deadlock between trade unions, when it's not possible to reach a compromise which allows to go further and to make the economy stronger, we need to, of course, to ask the people what they do think. And I don't understand how people who feel democratic cannot support such an idea.
All right, and another driving point of the French president in his speech, in Annecy, his first campaign speech, was to hammer home the point that he's been present on the foreign stage over the past 5 years.
France at the G8 meeting, France at the G20 meeting, France in the United Nations, in favor of Georgia, in favor of Côte d'Ivoire, and in Libya. France has shown the way forward by being loyal to its history. France is listened to in the world. People listen to France, people respect France across the world.
Evelyne Josselin, the French president is unpopular in France in the polls, but abroad he's got high name recognition after his first mandate.
Well, I don't think so. I think that he has first been greeted as a conservative, but my American friends and even my English friends have discovered, meanwhile, that he acted as a statist and as a socialist at times, and that he had been pandering to the left all the time. As to his foreign policy, I just don't know what it is exactly about. I mean, does he allude to his intervention in Libya? We now know the results, and it's not very bright.
One that the British Prime Minister supported as well.
As well, unfortunately, I think, because they had nothing to do in that business. And he also said something very interesting about referendum. He seems to be in favor now of more direct democracy. But we have to know that 1/5 of the parliament, the two houses of parliament, 1/5 of them has the power to nullify any decision by the French people. So the real referendum would be not top-down, as he proposes, but bottom-up, just like in the Swiss cantons or in some states of the United States. And this has not been alluded to, so far as I could realize.
Sophia Baratsas, is there a disconnect between the way the French feel about Nicolas Sarkozy and when you go home to Greece, the way people feel about him over there?
No, I think we all Europeans see the contradictions. Let's just go back to the facts. He says that France, the world listens to France. Not even Europe listens to France. We know how the decisions are being taken in Europe. It's Miss Angela Merkel who takes the decisions. We all know that. He talks about the referendum and give back the word to the citizens. How could a president of France allow such undemocratic measures to be taken in a country that he says he loves, in the European Union, and at the same time talk about giving the word to citizens? I don't think that we look in a different way at Sarkozy when we are Greek or when we are French or when we are Spanish. We all know now that it's a nice game, but it will not work anymore.
Right. I mean, the referendum, just to come back to history, is also interesting. I mentioned recent history, but there's more ancient history. General de Gaulle lost a referendum on regional reform, which sounded like not a very important one, in 1969, just a year after the May 68 events, he lost that referendum and he left power. So, I mean, it's very dangerous in a way for a president also to say, oh, I want to organize a referendum, be it on the jobless or on immigrants, because people will decide on the president in the end. They will vote for him or against him. So this is why it sounds really like more electoral tactics than actual beliefs in something that he wants to do. He said maybe there'll be a referendum. But again, it's to rebuild a tie with the French that has been severed during those 5 years, as the polls show.
All right, I want to pick up on a point that Sophia mentioned a moment ago, which is the French president deciding that mentioning always Angela Merkel of late. There's been the promise that the German chancellor would come and campaign for Sarkozy. On Facebook, viewers taking a dim view. Lorenzo writes the following, which is that Blair was often called Bush's poodle. Maybe poodle can be applied to Sarkozy too, with his relationship to Angela Merkel. So it seems as though it's not always something that's a winner. But I guess, in a way, Axelle Lemaire, you could turn the equation around the other way. How would President Hollande of the Socialists get along with the German Chancellor, seeing as he's campaigned for her main rival?
I don't see why they couldn't agree on certain common grounds if they both understand that their common interest is the European interest, and I'm pretty sure that François Hollande could get along well with Angela Merkel, just as, for example, François Mitterrand did with Margaret Thatcher. This could have looked as an unnatural relationship, but still, when it came to taking important decisions, they managed to talk together and work together. I don't think that Nicolas Sarkozy has such a good image as a leader abroad. From London, what I can see is that he has damaged the important Franco-British relationship by his attitude, his pretentious behavior, by some declarations that he's made, and he's clearly not a leader in Europe and not in the world, and he's likely to upset many countries with his admiration of the German model and this couple he wants to form with Angela Merkel without listening to the other countries.
All right, Mark Perlman, are you surprised when you see Nicolas Sarkozy tout the German model to the French voters?
It is surprising, but it is certainly not just like this. Nicolas Sarkozy is someone who loves polls. He commissions polls right and left, and he certainly has had polls telling him that Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel are seen as a good couple, and that Angela Merkel is popular, but also that Germany is seen as a model by the French people. This is why, in a recent interview, I think he mentioned Germany 16 times, and it was really surprising, especially coming from a Gaullist. Franco-German relations have not always been something that was very smooth, even though General de Gaulle reconciled with Germany, but still this idea, some segments of the conservative people will be upset to see Nicolas Sarkozy speak of Germany, of Angela Merkel, as the model to follow, and essentially saying that France has been wrong, Germany has been right. But on the other hand, he is putting on one hand Greece and saying, you don't want to become Greece, so you'd rather be Germany. And that's probably something people will say, well, if I have to choose between Greece and Germany, for now, I'll go with Germany.
On Friday, another point that Axelle Lemaire made there was that this closeness with Germany has strained the relationship with Britain to a certain degree. On Friday, the British Prime Minister will be in Paris. They'll be mostly talking about defense issues, on which the French and the UK agree and work closely together. Do you see this relationship souring for good between France and the UK at this point?
I don't know about that, but I know the American conservative viewpoint on the question. To them, Nicolas Sarkozy joining NATO has definitely weakened NATO, and that's final. I don't know what the British think of the matter. I admit that I haven't been in contact with anybody from the Defense Department in a long time. I don't know what they actually, since the Libya...
But how do you feel about his closeness with Angela Merkel?
Oh, well, our partner here said that as a Gaullist, well, first of all, Sarkozy is not anymore a Gaullist than he is a conservative. I mean, he's not right-wing, he's not anything like that. He's at best a centrist, that's all, and he's not a Gaullist. Best proof of that is that de Gaulle would never have accepted to be the junior partner in any partnership with Germany. That's absolutely clear. And he's definitely the poodle to Angela Merkel, as you said.
All right. The campaign finally is the narrative of the campaign, and it's going to be a bit of a battle. If you're just joining us here on France 24, earlier we were watching the first campaign speech of Nicolas Sarkozy. He mentioned the word France often. He talked of strength. He talked of values. The opposition trying to make it all about the economy.
We will only be able to get our country's economy back on track if we manage to get the financial world under control. The financial world does not need to run for office. It will not be interviewed tonight on the French channel TF1. It does not need to run for office because it already dominates our politics, while democracy should rule.
Axelle Lemaire, again, I'm sorry to ask you the same question twice, but when you hear François Hollande talk about international finance, very much left-wing rhetoric there in that speech, how will he be able to do business with the Germans?
I'm not sure that's left-wing rhetoric. I mean, Mario Monti was in London a few weeks ago, and he's the first one to agree that the financial markets have to be regulated, and that it's important to cut down the deficits, but that this has to go along with policies promoting growth and jobs. So I think it may sound as progressive. I'm not sure it's totally red, but is this not the best way to try to give the power back to the people by telling them that it's not the markets that will decide on their behalf, rather than promising some referendums on issues that won't change their real situation?
Mark Proman, again, for viewers who don't know perhaps the intricacies of French politics, we have a system where there are two rounds to the presidential election. We see in that speech Nicolas Sarkozy tacking right. Is François Hollande tacking far to the left?
He's trying to find a balance. François Hollande has given like three major speeches. In the first one, he wanted to establish himself as a leader and as a leftist leader, so he attacked the world of finance. He said we have to bring it under control. Since then, he's also said, I want to unite all the French. I want to be above the fray. I don't want to be divisive. He was clearly alluding to Nicolas Sarkozy and some of the declaration he allegedly made to foreign journalists, where he said, there are no more communists in France recently. He denied that he said that, but clearly he's trying to grab the voters from the far left to the center because he knows that whoever gets to the second round, there are only two candidates who can make it to the second round, he needs to go beyond his base. And so François Hollande is more or less a centrist in the Socialist Party, and he wants to be sure that he can get the votes from the centrist voters who are now hesitating between him, Nicolas Sarkozy, and will be the ones who make the decision, as usual, in an election.
Sofia Baratzis, is it this election going to be typically French? I know in your country we're looking at snap elections for April. There too, there's a tug to the extremes, the left and the right.
Yes, I read today that the extreme left has risen up until 40%. It's the first time in Greece. It never happened. Not the PASOK has 8%. And
a rejection
Greece,
of moderates all around?
Yes, of course. And Greece is not a left country. Greece is a country without politics anymore. The extreme left has risen up because we don't know what to say anymore. We just need to say no to what's happening to us. Sarkozy talked about saying no. He said la France du non. But I don't.
Voters who reject everything.
Yes, but he's not capable of saying no to anything.
That's your feeling there.
Yes.
Nicolas Sarkozy, who, again, as we said at the beginning of his speech, serving up, stopping short of, I guess you could call it a mea culpa, but nonetheless giving his own personal assessment of his first 5 years in office.
The last 5 years have taken a heavy toll on the nation and on the life of the man charged with leading the country in such difficult times and facing such huge challenges. In these 5 years, I was able to measure the depth of the job of president. The French people want someone with absolute devotion, someone they can count on.
Axelle Lemaire, we know all around in Europe it's been a bad couple of years for incumbents. Nonetheless, again, we come back to his argument. The socialists have been out of office for so long that would they be able to handle what is an unprecedented economic storm?
Well, if we listen to that theory, there wouldn't be any democracy. Democracy is based on change of government majorities. So, and Nicolas Sarkozy describes himself as both as a victim of the situation and the crisis, and as a person on a mission. So it's more the country calling him and needing him as the captain of the ship than a candidate who's likely to put forward a project with proposals to improve the situation. I find it quite striking that he says he's the captain of a sinking ship, but he's never tried to make the ship more sturdy, including with his other European partner. Maybe he should start looking at the ship, at the country of France, before looking at himself.
All right, and one final word, because we're almost out of time. Mark Perlman. First round of the presidential election, April 22nd. He's got a 14-point deficit. For you, what's the cutoff date after which time it'll be too late to play catch-up?
Well, if in the next 2 weeks he doesn't inch up significantly in the polls, it will be very, very hard for him to overcome that deficit. Yes. Now he's unveiled himself as a candidate. We know what the values that he wants to defend, the things he wants to do. If this doesn't show up in the polls in 2 weeks, then it will be too late for him.
All right, you saw his first campaign speech here on France 24. We'll see if that momentum begins. Mark Perlman, I want to thank you. I want to thank Sophia Bouratzis, Evelyne Josselin, and we want to thank Axelle Lemaire for being with us from London, and Benjamin Locard, who was with us earlier from Annecy for the ruling UMP party. Thank you for being with us here for a special edition of the France 24 debate.